Big red button. So this talk today is called From Request to Reality, Building Strong Foundations for Web Projects. I'm Veronica Brace. I'm a web graphics specialist with the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences in the School of Public Health at the University of Washington. I grew, where did it go? There it is. I grew DOHS's web services from 9 websites to 25 websites in about 5 years. This heavily contributed to the 80% increase in visitors over the same time period. Recently, our sites ranked second on one of UW's primary website metrics that included most of the over 47,000 sites on campus. I focus on working with entities from around the department and helping them both build communications capacity and communicate appropriately online. Most of these groups are scientists, and there's a group of 6 of them, and they run a laboratory or they run a project, and they have a need to do external communications, tell people about their services, tell people about the work that they do, and they need to do it a lot of times through a website of some type, and they don't know anything about any of that. So this is the process that I use when I'm working with them to go ahead and start talking about how we communicate online and how we build a website and such. So this is definitely a process for brochure sites. We have a couple pretty standard types of dynamic content, a blog. A lot of our groups, they're research groups, so they're generating a lot of resources. So things like fact sheets and such, and they need to have the ability to share those. And so, some of those things might get integrated into these types of sites, but for the most part, they're that 5 to 10 pages of pretty static information that we're looking at. So our process works that they submit a request. We get all of the major stakeholders from their group together, and we do a 90-minute launch meeting. And that's what we're going to be talking about the most today. From there, I write content props for them because almost none of them will have written for a website before. And so they don't know tone, they don't know how to write, pieces like that. From there, the subject matter experts actually write the content, work with developers to get a website built, and then from there we place content, the new site is launched, and then because we have 1.5 of us who manage about 30 websites, we don't have time to make all of the tiny updates. So we actually do quite a bit of training with them and have a lot of documentation for them so to best support them in being able to update their own websites. Of course, that doesn't always work, but that is generally speaking our goal. So in the request, a couple things to keep in mind. The people I work with most of the time have never made or updated a website before. They have no idea what they're asking. They don't know if this is a good ask or a bad ask. And I ran into this a lot freelancing too. They don't know if that request is complicated or uncomplicated. They just know that they kind of like it. And so as you're going through this whole process, keeping in mind that they a lot of times don't know, and you just want to be talking to them and being really clear about where stuff's complicated versus uncomplicated versus more time on their part. Pieces like that get really important in the long-term success of projects. Scoping projects. I strongly recommend under-scoping projects. Whatever the minimum viable product is to meet their need, that's where you want to start. Once they're doing a great job with that, build it a little bit more. You can add resources, add blogs, things like that can always be added later. Better to underscope and have to add than to overscope and have the website look too quiet. Comparable sites, and we're going to talk about comps a lot, are your friend. Ask them early and often. Whose websites do you like that are similar to yours? What do you see about them that you like? And this can also help to anchor the conversation. So as they're saying, hey, I really want a blog, and they show you this website that has like these 2-sentence updates that get posted once a month or once every 2 months, you're like, yes, that blog, that style of blog. Let's talk about some ways to do that don't involve full blog infrastructure where the expectations that you're writing like a full web page and posting once or twice a month, which can be pretty onerous for groups that are smaller and don't have that comms capability built in. Lastly, Upkeep. before you get too far in the project, you want to figure out what's going to be their upkeep strategy. Is it sending me an email once a year and having me update their hours and what the date of Thanksgiving is for the year? Do they have 2 full-time comm staff who are generating materials, who are excited to learn about their website, how to update it, and what's going to be going on it? Those are 2 really different situations, and you want to kind of keep that in mind as you're working through them. When I'm responding to requests, I'm almost always looking for a time for the launch meeting. Again, comps, ask them, review them. They're really important. After I hear a little bit, I normally try to get like a couple paragraphs in those comps from them. I like to share back similar projects that we have already up. So like, oh my gosh, that's such a cool project. I feel like it's got some similarities with this other project we completed recently. It has some things that might work really well for you. Does this look about right? And then they look at it before that meeting. So when they come to the meeting, they start to have some opinions, and they're not walking into a meeting where you're trying to figure out what website you're building totally cold. Determine if there are any game-changing timeline considerations. Obviously, if they're submitting a huge bid for work in a couple months and they really need this website up and to look active by then, your scope is so much different than if you've got 6 to 8 months. Also, if all of leadership takes the month of June off, you're probably not launching the site in June. So that's something to keep in mind as well. I always like to get any communications and materials that they already have, often things like a news release, a one-pager. So obviously if they have a current website, get that, review it. When I'm doing content strategy, I always like to start with a blank slate strategy, as opposed to a rebuild strategy. I found that to be more successful. But whatever you can get that they already have and review, that's really helpful. And then for us, we talk about project funding. A lot of these projects get funded for $1 million or $2 million or even more over the course of 6 months, a year, 5 years. Learning about that can give you a pretty good idea, or if you're working freelance, can give you an idea of what their budget is. Again, can help you scope that project appropriately, right? If you don't know that they're only looking to spend $2,000 on a website versus $20,000 on a website, those are different. Okay, so now we get into the launch meeting. That's most of what we're talking about today. We have 3 goals for our launch meeting. 1, we want to leave the meeting with a project plan. 2, we want full project buy-in from these people. We want them to be excited about this project. We want them to understand what the next steps are. And we want them to be not mad about our minimum viable scope. Which is always a little bit fun. And then the last piece, clear next steps for each person in the meeting. So it's that idea of like, what are you doing next to keep this project rolling? I've seen a lot of projects really stall out after this first meeting because the next step is, in 3 months we'll talk to you again. And that's not very fun. So a lot of times you can, even if your team doesn't have the capacity to jump right in, there are some things that you can get them doing and be working with them a little bit and kind of slow roll some of that until your team really has more capacity to be jumping into this project. Okay, so now's the part where we get to have a little bit more fun. I have some standard documentation that I use for these meetings, and we are going to live fill it out together. So if you would like to participate in throwing me curveballs, I would encourage you to pull up this Google Doc and we'll go through it together. You should have edit access, so you should be able to actually edit it. So for the launch meeting, I do some prep. Of course, I read any materials, I review their comps. Again, ask for comps, and then look at them. Not groundbreaking stuff, but can be really important. And then lastly, don't forget to know walking in what yours and your team's capacity is for the upcoming, whatever is relevant in terms of time period. So you know what you can commit going into the meeting, right? Like we were talking about earlier, if we know that they're going to want this website in 2 months, and you know that your team doesn't have real time to spend on it for 3 months, you need to know that going into the meeting so you can work with them on possibly a bridge or something like that. Okay, so here we go. I'm also going to pull up the documentation. So we start with alignment and goals. We're going to start by listening. Here's some like train the trainer type of notes, but let's get in and actually work on a new website overview worksheet for the Air Pollution Labs group. Should we have any fun timeline restrictions?
January.
It needs to be up by January. Oh, is that when their funding starts?
January. We have to have everything up by then.
Yeah,
Okay.
Get through Christmas.
Jan 1, 2025. Cool. One of the things about timeline, about that field, is that I like to mention it right at the beginning with groups, because again, if they've got timeline considerations, you want to know right up front so you can scope it correctly. But if they don't have timeline considerations, they just need a website at some point in the future. Often this is actually the last field that I fill in on this sheet. Okay, so context and overview. Tell me about your group. Sounds like you're probably newly funded. Sounds like maybe the funding starts in January. Okay. Is this a group that's worked together before, do you think? You think we've got some new investigators working together?
Let's say like, in the context, can you also say like, we're also launching like a media or marketing campaign?
Yeah.
And those videos or whatever they are also expected to be on the website.
Yeah, marketing campaign launch will generate, we'll say like 3 to 5 marketing vids to be placed on website. This is, everybody walks into a meeting, every group that you work with walks into a meeting with a story. What you're looking for here is you want the story, okay? That really gives you a lot of background and can help set you up for success in making the best recommendations for them, okay? So we'll go with that. Communications objectives. So what are we trying to do, group? Why do we need a website? And aim for objectives that are smart, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely if you can. But a lot of times with smaller groups or smaller companies even, they're pretty generic. So it might be like, tell people that air pollution is bad for them. Offer specific information on how to reduce the impact. What else might we be trying to do? What else might be communications objectives for this website?
The grant that we're getting requires us to tell somebody something about it, or we have investors we're trying to keep happy, so we have to be able to tell them what's going on, right?
Yes.
I think I also like run into scenarios where like it might be like government funded, so like maybe they are just funds to spread out like a social awareness campaign.
Yeah.
And that's why it has like these layers where we're also doing videos, and while we're not necessarily selling something, we're spreading awareness and making all that like information available on the website.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. The great thing about those groups is that they generally have some funds to pay somebody to do communications,
Yeah.
which is always a little bit lovely for building them a website. Cool. Review process and internal stakeholders. I think all of us have gotten into a project, kind of gotten to that point where you're like, yes, it's wrapping up, this has been such a great project, and then they're like, okay, this has all been great, but I really actually need to run it by this VP who's never seen or touched this project. And you're like, fantastic, let's add another 6 months onto this project right now. So, you know, if you can find out about that early in the game, it's really helpful. So, it sounds like we probably have a comms person on this team, so they're probably a major stakeholder. Communications team of 1. Okay. Who else should be the stakeholders in this project from the customer side?
Maybe it's like a partner group, so not necessarily one VP, but like 3 or 4 partners.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I was going to say, principal investigators. One of whom is on a research trip, in South America.
3 other groups
For the next month and a half.
No cell service.
No, not South America, different time zones. So, Australia.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Plus 16 hours. There's only a couple hours a day.
Japan for the summer, great. I'm going to have 3 a.m. emails for the
Oh
summer.
my gosh.
Doing stand-ups every day at 2 in the morning.
We had one of our groups had all of their PIs working out of Mongolia for a quarter together. It's like, great, yeah. They're like, well, we can't really get web reception, so we kind of need to do all of it over email. Good. Super helpful. Okay, cool. Anything else we should talk about in terms of review process or internal stakeholders?
Like the process, the communication or reporting or anything like that, like progress or status reports or...
Yeah, so that's the other part here is like, at what point do people need to review? So a lot of times what I'll do is do like comms, all levels, and PIs at checkpoints, and then we set up a couple checkpoints and we say, hey, at these checkpoints we're going to get the PIs involved. And if you can do that in this first meeting and at the beginning, it builds that expectation for them that they're going to get called in to check things at certain points. And then we also build that into the timeline, because I don't know if you guys have ever worked with higher level stakeholders who are like, yes, I need to check that checkpoint. I will get that back to you in 4 to 6 weeks. And the people who work with them know that about them, right? Everybody knows when they send stuff to their boss. Does your boss a next day person? Is your boss like sometime in the future I shall get stuff back to you type person? So when we get to timeline later, that's pretty important. Again, I work in really specific contexts, so these are the expectations that we have set for our group. If you're doing something like this, I would strongly recommend that you have expectations that you're talking about. So that way, again, people know what this process is going to look like for them. So I tell groups that they can expect us to help with overall planning for the site, refining content, pointing them towards possible photos, help them build out the site and place the content that they give us. We'll provide training and ongoing technical support on website upkeep. Note that doesn't say content support. We're happy to advise, we're happy to support, but we don't write all of their content for their website going forward. And then the groups that we work with can expect to work with us to define their audiences and goals for the site, work with us to turn that into a list of content needed for the site, provide the actual content for the site, and establish a plan for ongoing website upkeep. When I'm working with groups on this process, I like to just be like, and the great thing is we checked 2 things off that list today, because the next page that we're going to get into here is an audience sheet and content sheets. So, and you guys can feel free to jump in and type in this if you're wanting to add fun stuff. So this, and then this is what I shop around to my leadership most of the time. So when my leadership says, hey, I want to hear a project overview of this project, I'm like, okay, we've got the worksheets for that website that we're creating for them. And this front page is like our summary of the project. And that helps me, can keep me a lot of times from having to generate yet another piece of documentation for my bosses and departmental leadership when they start asking about what's this project, what's happening in it, and pieces like that. And you don't have to worry about, because I fill this out live with groups, I don't have to worry about the group having concerns about the thing that got sent to leadership because they worked with me on it. And so that's been really helpful. Okay. In my presentation here, we've got, alignment and goals. This is a lot of the stuff that we just talked through. But I have slides for it because of course I do. The presentation, that's how that works. And then we get into audience and content planning. So now a lot of the people that I work with haven't done communications exercises before. And this is true in small business. I found this a lot when I was freelancing. That artist who's made pottery professionally for 20 years and was working as part of a company, they don't know what marketing is. They don't know how to do the basics of communications, especially online. So over my career, both at the U and outside, there's been a lot of introducing basic communications information to them. So this next section is really about that. It's targeted at groups where they don't already have built-in communications, or if they're built-in communications, don't have experience in the environment that they're now working in. This is a place that we can help support. Okay, so back here. So who are we targeting with our information? One of the great things, we already found out that our grant funders require us to provide. So we're going to call that group funders. And okay, who else? You talked a little bit about the general public. We're going to be hitting them with some marketing campaigns. General public. Who else might be audiences for this website? Maybe other groups that might want to work with them on research or work with them to spread the word about research. Okay. Anybody else we want to add today?
I would characterize it, but basically it's kind of the opposite of a psychon, communicating the results of whatever's going on, but I'm not sure exactly how that translates to the audience other than general public. But
okay, so people interested in scientific publications. Thank you, Tom.
it just depends on whether this is a general public versus say policy, policy stakeholders or whatever. Not knowing anything about this particular mission.
Well, we're making it up, you see.
Okay. Policy makers.
That's the joy of this, is that we can make it up. Policymakers, yeah, that's another group. A lot of times when you're doing this scientific research, you want to be getting it to people who are making the policies about how do we protect people. So it's a really key group. Who else? Anybody else we're looking to specifically get some information to?
Is there like a collaboration aspect to this site?
Sure.
Like PIs or whatever.
How is it different from other groups who might want to work with them? Maybe just other PIs?
No, that would probably encompass that.
Okay, cool. Sorry, not trying to...
No, that's good.
Okay, cool. So now we're going to talk about how, at this point, this list isn't so long that I would be like, we must shrink and squash. But sometimes when I'm talking to groups who've never done communications work before, I get the list of policymakers at the EPA, policymakers at the FDA, policymakers for the state of Washington. And so with this list, we don't really need to shrink it very much. We don't really need to shrink it. But sometimes that is a thing. generally, unless you have some incredibly complicated website that's for a large corporation or a really large entity, 3 to 4 audiences is plenty of audiences. Our main departmental website has 5 general audiences, and then we subdivide within that as we're talking to them. But you don't need 20,000 audience groups. And in fact, it's really unhelpful when you go to do your IA here in a minute. So, now, start by copying, and we're going to paste in here. There we go. So now, what do we want people, what's your goal for these people on the website? Funders, you want to look active. Great. You probably don't necessarily have a specific call to action for that group. You probably just want to look generally active, and that's fine. General public. Well, I hear we're running a big campaign. They're running a big public interest campaign. So, you know, maybe our goal, and we're doing some video work with that. So maybe our goal for the general public is to watch one informational video. Cool. Other groups that want to work with, I would normally say us in these. Let me fix that real quick. Us. So other groups that want to work with us. Any thoughts on what our goal would be for them? Maybe sharing some basics about the research?
Easily searchable or navigable, be able to drill down to, I don't know anything about this site.
Well, we're making it up.
Contact us, or looking for more information, or more data, or whatever it is that they're putting out.
Contact us. Cool. Okay. And then for the people who are interested in scientific publications, probably want to be able to access information on our publications. Policymakers. You know, this is one of those things where sometimes we see them fall into general public. So it might actually be a question, or it might be something where we actually want them to watch that one informational video. Now, for other groups, they might be writing full-on fact sheets about, or policy briefs about a specific realm of research. And in that case, you know, we probably want them to download a policy brief. But let's say that we're just going to keep them with the general public for now. And so we'll say, watch one informational. Thank you, Google. Okay. So now we talk about success criteria. This is the part where a lot of times, as much as we can, of course, we want success criteria to be SMART, you know, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. You know, when we're talking high-level goals, sometimes that's harder. Here, it tends to be a little bit easier, actually. So I often just will copy and paste this again. Look active. So one update to the front page a month. That will probably cover look active. It's also something that's measurable for the group, right? Are they updating it once a month? If yes, then yes. If no, then no. Okay, general public, watch one informational video.
So is the success criteria like, what would be a successful outcome for that audience or
Yep.
for us? Okay, because one thing I was thinking is, in somehow having like the general public feel informed enough to want to reach out to their local policymakers and like push for whatever policy change that is. So it'd be, but they wouldn't know that if they didn't have that information on like why maybe air pollution is maybe getting as bad as it is or whatever that is. So
Yeah, and if that's the goal, then, you know, you can say like, hey, we're going to put this video in, and then underneath, we're going to have a button that's like the learn who your local policymaker is, and to be able to write them an email, and actually go ahead and link them to one of those services where they can find their local policymakers and could write them a generally automated email where you just type in what you're concerned about, right? Then you can track clicks to that button.
Right.
And that would be the way to track that on your website without having to do anything too complicated. So let's go ahead and add that here. So clicks to button to find local policy makers. Okay. And in some perfect world, you have some idea of the impact. When it's a new group, it's really hard to set actual numbers for this, right? I don't know what their marketing spend is going to be. I don't know what their reach in that marketing is going to be and such. So a lot of times we actually wouldn't set specific numbers for a new launch site. But if you already have an idea that the numbers on this conversion metric are X, I generally add 10 to 20% that we're looking to boost it by, starting 3 months post-launch and looking at it 9 months post-launch. They're looking at a 6-month period that starts 3 months after launch. As I think everybody in this room probably knows, the first 3 months a website is up. It's just...
Crickets.
Yeah. You got to get Google to recognize that it's a thing. You got to get those first couple people to spend actual time on the website before your stuff starts really working, right? Okay, so other groups that want to work with us, contact us. Well, on the plus side, you can track emails incoming. So incoming emails about working together. Okay, people interested. So this would be views to publication page, probably. Okay. And then for policymakers, we decided not to track video views to look at the general public. But we have this call to action that's the same for these two audiences, right? And there's not any real way to separate those. So then, but we also don't think any of them are going to be clicking the button to find out who their local policymakers are. If they're policymakers or policy influencers, they know that already. So what would we be looking at to see whether or not they're finding what they're looking for? We're probably looking at video views, right? So we probably just want to be seeing video views. The other thing is maybe we decide to write some policy briefs. And so maybe it's like find your local policy makers and send them this policy brief. And maybe that's something that we have paired. So let's say we're doing downloads of policy brief. Cool. Okay. So, again, a lot of the groups that, small groups, small businesses, groups like this, won't have done comms work before. So now, we're going to talk about what content might you want on the website. Most of these people aren't used to thinking in the language of an about us page, a people who work here page, a contact us page. That's not how their brain is wired. And so by rephrasing it like this, asking them just like, what information do you want to make sure is on your website, can be a lot more welcoming in terms of language for them and help to generate the information that you're looking for without being like, you want an about us page. What other pages would you like? So I'll start off with my default list of email, phone number, mailing address, let's see. So we also said, as part of our success criteria, we identified some content that needs to exist on the website. So we've got some informational videos. Okay, we've got information about contacting policy. That's spelled wrong. That's okay. I'll fix that later. Information about contacting policymakers. We already talked about incoming emails, about working together. We said we needed to provide an email address already. Publication information. And then policy briefs. Okay, what other information might this group find relevant to put on their website?
If it was like someone that was even bothering to tie it in with a marketing campaign, they might create like marketing materials, so like fact sheets, and they might create these materials and kind of summarize it as like a toolkit. So we want a toolkit on our website.
Yeah, a marketing landing page or a toolkit page. Yeah, absolutely. We haven't talked at all about like what exactly they might be researching or any information about like subspecialization. So maybe some stuff that's like detailed information about research or work. Do you think that this group wants like one of those here's who works here pages where you provide the headshots and email address of everybody, or you think I
PIs
always
want that.
what?
The PIs want that.
The PIs want that.
Letters they have after the name,
Yeah, it is a comparison contest. A little bit there. Sure. Okay. So
I would say they want it, and maybe in strategy, you could say, here's why it might not be necessary for this, but it is a want, maybe.
yeah. I do try to talk groups out of this. This is the fastest page. It goes to go out of date. This page goes out of date faster than any other page on any website ever. And they have to use and they always want headshots on there. So they always have to know how to update the page with the new headshots that they then have to crop and place correctly in their web pages. And that's always a little bit of fun. So yeah, I do try to talk them out of this. But on the plus side, I don't have to actually build this website. So or handle any content upkeep. So we'll let them leave it in this time. Okay, so the next part is how might you group the most important pieces of content? Generally, pretty quickly, I then take their like, okay, we need this information, and that goes on an About Us page. And then additionally, we've got our people page. Okay. And then this is a part that sometimes groups can kind of help a little bit, but for people who are more familiar with websites, you know that the contact page is going to exist, right? You know what those common pieces are. You also know what the patterns are, because remember, one of the most important things as you're doing information architecture for a website is matching patterns that people are used to. Okay, that's one of your, if not your top strategy in making sure that people can find what they're looking for. In this case, we're going to combine About Us and Contact Us, because these websites tend to do that in real life. Let's see. So we still need to find a place for informational videos, information about contacting policymakers, publication information, policy briefs, marketing landing page. So then we might have like a page that's like our work and publications. And then there's probably a page that's like learn about impacts to your health because unfortunately, as much as I don't like that phrasing, that's the phrasing that gets people to click on informational videos. And then, there's probably, like what you're saying, like a toolkit page. There might be another page that's like policy briefs that are easier to sort. Go ahead.
We tend to do a lot of these like silo websites, so it's usually like we'll do like a resources, and not only do you have your toolkit, but maybe you can download those videos that were on a campaign ad. So it's a need to like nest them all under like resources.
Yeah, so we could take and make this like a resources page. Yeah, we use that strategy a lot too, where we have a central resources page, and then we have the ability we use effectively exposed filters, and people can filter down to like, okay, I want a toolkit, I want a policy brief, I want a fact sheet, or we've got some groups that work with clinicians. Okay, so then the question is like, is this something for a one-pager for you to have printed next to your workstation, so when something comes in, you know exactly what the treatment steps are to minimize your chances of that person developing antibiotic resistance? Or is this the one-pager that you give to the mom who's like, my baby is sick and needs antibiotics, when it's clearly viral? That's the type of thing. Yeah, so we do a lot of that with just a resources page too. So that's a great idea for this. Cool. Yeah, I think that looks like a pretty reasonable list of pages. So then the next step is, getting into, getting into the menu here. Let's get rid of this. One of the things that I found is really hard to communicate in almost any other format than a mock-up is how a menu structure might work, and how this list of pages might turn into a menu structure. This is how I tend to do it. It's just like you have a main menu item, then some drop-downs. So you got About Us, and then Our People, and then Publications, and then probably looks about something like that. With Learn About Impacts to Your Health being sort of a primary landing page, something like that. You can have a higher impact if you've got a page that's a little bit narrative. It's got some of that introductory paragraphs. You've got your policy briefs and your videos paired together on one page. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't still have that resources page and that page where you can go just find each of those pieces individually and grab exactly what you're looking for. But when you can take and appropriately run them through a page, you end up having higher click-through rates, more people read for longer, and you do a better job hitting those metrics. So we'll go ahead and leave that in there. Timeline. Okay, so at this point, we kind of have a scope for our website, right? Like, we know how many pages need written. We've established that we're going to have some kind of way to do resources. We established that we're going to have some relatively easy way to update the front page. So your scope is kind of done. Now, clearly, as you're working with your developers and stuff, there's a lot more decisions that need to be made. But a lot of those actually don't necessarily have to be made with the client when they're a small group. Unless they're used to making decisions like that, a lot of those clients will get really overwhelmed really, really quickly. And that's always a bummer place to be. So if you've kind of got scope, or actually got scope decided, now you can do a timeline. This is the timeline that I use as a standard. Of course, add and subtract pieces as needed. We're doing resources with this group, so there would need to be a couple of additional meetings talking like, okay, how are you going to get me the titles and such for each of your resources. Our group happens to have a process for that already that makes that pretty straightforward, but it's important to keep in mind that that's a thing. And then I am not going to talk about timeline in that spreadsheet, going to talk about the timeline in this presentation here because, again, this is train the trainer type of information. And I've got some information here about how long I've expected this to take in the past. So, you know, everybody's coming together for the launch meeting. This gets back to that idea of like, hey, there's something on this list we can already check off. Everybody loves being able to check off stuff off a list immediately. And then the next thing our team does is we get writing prompts to the subject matter expert team. So again, most of the groups, whether you're working with small businesses or, you know, a group of researchers, haven't done writing for the web yet. So they are going to need prompts that include information like who's their target audience. If they're writing to a specific grade level, like say they're PhDs who are writing information for the general public, you know, I'm telling them that they need to be targeting an 8th grade writing level, and then I'm providing them guidance on how in the world do they do that. And so all of that is information that can be rolled into those writing prompts to help them get the first round of content back to our team in a more usable format. It can actually dramatically reduce the number of back and forths it takes. This is the time that it takes me to do these. Of course, it depends on workload, but if you're trying to do something like this, that's a timeline that might work. I ask them to write 1 page to start. I don't say, okay, go take these content prompts, go, get back to me in 6 weeks. I actually want to review 1 page. You know, when I said 8th grade level, did you just ignore that? Those tools that I included in those writing prompts, were those also ignored, or did you actually go there? You know, pieces like that. And then sometimes you're working with a group who, you know, in our pretend scenario here, the group probably has a comms person if they're trying to do a lot of science outreach. But if you're working with a group who are only lab professionals, have never done any external communication in their life, there's a chance that they might need additional support in this. And if you only have them write 1 page and you find out after that 1 page, you can make decisions differently for those next couple stages and more supportive for those next couple stages. So you run into less challenges. Feedback on page 2. So they do it and then I give them feedback. Also check to see, like I said, if there's anything special going on there in terms of additional support needed. And then all content due. This is the rule of thumb that I use. And then first round review. We do a couple rounds of review. And then our team does a copy edit. Nobody wants me copy editing their stuff. We have a professional editor on our comms team who can copy edit. So, you know, they need time to do that. The other thing is if you are working where you don't necessarily have a copy editor, you can get a freelance copy editor. As I've freelanced, I've always found it worthwhile to hire that copy editor. They're never that expensive, but the stuff that they fix helps to make sure that your client looks more professional. And that's super important. If they have a website up, then we almost always do a site freeze. So we tell them, hey, any changes you make to your site past this date time aren't going to get included. This is mostly like, you know, people who already have a resources section and we're rebuilding it. Sometimes they're like, we added 5 resources last week and you're launching it this week. Where did our 5 resources go? So just being really clear that, like, if you make changes after this date, we're not going to catch them in that rebuild is something that's super helpful. Content entry due. Our team does content entry. So even with smaller groups where the goal is for them to do some level of upkeep themselves. So that's like saying, we're closed on Thanksgiving. It falls on November 20th this year. Having them do that first round of content entry as their intro to web editing is really mean. And there's a lot of it that needs done. So a lot of times it's even just straight up faster for our team to do it rather than having them do it. then we have them, so we do content entry, and then we have them do a site review. So we give them a week to put up notes. We have them divide them into 2 lists. One's a list of like, this is very, very wrong. Before this website goes live, this needs fixed. And, oh, we don't actually like how that paragraph flows now that everybody's edited it. We would really like to change that. The list of stuff that comes back on the like, so-and-so's email is wrong and it can't launch with the wrong email list, our team takes care of. But the stuff that's like, we'd like to rephrase that paragraph, we have them make a list. Because then you have training material, okay? So when you get into training with this group and you have to teach them how to edit their content on their website, they have that edited paragraph that they'd like to update. And so you can actually do that live with them in training and support them through that, as opposed to giving them training exercises that they don't care about, have zero interest in doing. And it also helps to cement in their brain a little bit more, because when they see that website in the future, they're going to be like, oh yeah, when it launched, I fixed that paragraph. And especially if these groups aren't editing them that often, the more of those little flickers you can get like that, the less questions you take, which is really key for us. Yeah, so punch list, that's what we call that list of non-critical but still required stuff. And then training. We actually do 2 hours of training. The first is like the world's most boring, this is what HTML is, this is what a p tag is, here's how you bold stuff, here's how you add a link on a web page. And then the second hour is the hour where they get to actually go in and make those updates and give it a try, where having that punch list is really helpful. We found that training to actually work better, like a lot better. It's reduced tickets dramatically from people who are new content editors. So, okay, we made it. Thank you guys for sticking with me.
Yeah.
Non-typical presentation. Thank you. Slides, blanks of the documentation we walked through today, the documentation we played with. I'll actually go through, put in the content props, so if that's something you're interested in seeing, or if you're watching this on YouTube later, those will be available after October 26th-ish probably. Takes me a couple weeks. Thank you guys so much for joining today and for participating. It makes this talk way more fun. Any questions?
So maybe kind of a bit off topic, but you guys mentioned the type of websites you work on. Is it usually always Drupal, or do you guys usually have any flexibility?
So right now we do all Drupal. Yeah, we have talked about having the option to do creating some basically matching WordPress sites. So when we're doing brochure sites, WordPress is just better at brochure sites. Maybe not these last couple months, but in general, WordPress is better at brochure sites. And so we've talked about having a WordPress platform and a Drupal platform. But the way that Tom and Albert have it set up right now, it actually isn't so bad to pop up a brochure site on Drupal. And then we have set patterns for things like blogs and resources. And there's another thing that we use called updates, which is where you're just adding a couple sentences like, super excited about this publication that came up, check it out now, that type of thing. So we have set patterns for that already in Drupal. And so a lot of times this is more about just figuring out which patterns we're going to apply to the new site, which is the reason that, when you hit that list of pages that are going to be generated and that list of content, for us, that pretty much tells you the scope specifically. Yeah, thank you.
Presuming, I guess, if you look at the schedule, there is no design processes going in here. We already have a lot of fixed design elements, fixed design infrastructure, all this kind of things. So this is content focused, right?
Yeah.
Obviously there could be things that get in there, talk about blogs and things about it, so there's a list, but least common, least minimum viable product.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not in there, but again, we have a lot of things to just pull off the shelf and throw in there, right? But I wanted to get into on that, the content freeze, like coming from my private sector experience, 8 times out of 10, a site launch is delayed because the content's not done yet. Or they haven't massaged it over from where it was coming from or whatever, or a stakeholder hasn't done their part or has changed the scope by the time you got there, right? And so that's, again, that's often what gets it to be a kind of a critical path on that. But we're not getting into design because we've done it.
Yeah.
We already have that.
We do also, like, I have a matching timeline for this that is about making sure that design's done and development's done on websites. Like, this is a third of the timeline that I talk about internally when we talk about like our full processes. We have, this is a content or customer timeline, and then the next timeline that we have is a design and communications timeline, and then we have a last timeline which is a developer timeline. So like Tom's one of our developers, and when he got the timeline, it would not look like this. The timeline that he's going to get is like, okay, here's our scope for the project, and it tends to be like pretty like brief. Like, we're creating a 5-page website. Normally they don't even care about that. They just care that it's a website and it's a multi-site or it's an integrated site. We're going to have resources and updates available on it. And I need a blank site on dev or test or whatever by this date. But as Tom said, content so often holds up launches of websites.
Mm-hmm.
I have had, like, nearly every web project, the content is the piece that determines the timeline for launch, with the exception of when you're developing a fully new theme or something like that, where of course it's more complicated, right? This workflow doesn't work for that. But if somebody's looking to start freelancing or just learn some of the basics of content strategy, this workflow gives them a good enough idea. So, of course, yeah.
Question, yeah. So I'm actually kind of new to academia, so what is it, like, the human factor? Is there, what are the differences between having like private sector clients and like, is there any, like, I don't know, is there any kind of different strategy I should take when I sit down with a PI versus if I sit down with like a CTO or something, trying to sell them on a website,
Yeah, so a lot of times for us, and I think it's similar for where you guys are, your service is kind of provided. And so, I'm really clear about the scope of what we can provide as part of our departmental service and what they have to go look elsewhere for. For example, we have one theme. They get that theme as part of our free services that we provide. Otherwise, if they want something different, I'm happy to point them to vendors for that.
Right.
I'm more than happy to. So that's a big difference. Now in the iSchool, I'm guessing that gets a little bit more complicated because there are people in our area, people are just like, I want to communicate it appropriately. I want to communicate the pieces I'm trying to communicate and do it appropriately. Whereas they probably, in the iSchool, it's going to probably be a little bit different. Maybe?
I don't know.
You've got
Yeah.
people that do IA and do like
Yeah.
assessments and things. So you got a little different audience than we do over health and safety realm.
Yeah. But the big difference is that, when I'm selling to a company, there is more discussion about like meeting sales metrics a lot of the time. So they're oftentimes trying to meet some type of sales metrics or some type of audience metrics. They're often, those discussions tend to be a lot more upfront. And then, of course, they want more flexibility with how it looks. Though I had a lot of luck with just, taking similar themes and kind of just adjusting coloring a little bit for them. But
Well, so far, I haven't been here that long, but what I felt the difference is it's a lot more collaborative and not as
Yeah.
adversarial, compared to the private sector, really. I'm not worried about losing the job, whatever.
I mean, if the job decides to walk away, less work for me.
Well,
Point one is less worried about money in general.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we're looking at exactly how this is going to impact budget. I mean, there is some of that.
Yeah.
But we also
It's not
have
near as-
concrete capacity kind of also.
Yeah, it's
Right.
Yes, that's what it is.
So prioritization becomes a bit more critical,
and that ends up being kind of related to that at a higher level, like getting leadership buy-in to different projects and getting them to prioritize them in a way that's helpful to you prioritizing your work actually tends to be a larger challenge for me in an academic setting. Whereas when you're freelancing or doing client-facing work, you're prioritizing them based on the timelines that you set with them and how much they're paying you realistically. So that part's a little bit different. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for joining, guys.
Right here.